Welcome to Behind the Business podcast. Each week, I'll be sharing episodes taking you behind the scenes of industry-leading creative small businesses. We'll talk about the real-life, messy behind-the-scenes process of what it takes to build a successful business. Hopefully, each episode helps you combat the perception of perfection within our industry. I hope each episode encourages you to keep showing up no matter how imperfectly, so that you can make your own unique impact on this world. Grab a cup of coffee or wine and let's dive right in. Cheers. Hey guys, I have one of my really good friends, Jontell, here to chat with us today. Jontell, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Yes. So I'm Jontell. I am a wedding and branding photographer, mainly branding now though. And I'm based in Richmond, Virginia.
Tell everyone a little bit about how you got started with photography in general.
Yeah. I've always loved photography since I was little. So it was just kind of this thing that naturally happened. I just always had a camera, whether I was like stealing my parents' cameras, or eventually I think I got like a DSLR camera for Christmas. And that was kind of what started me kind of moving towards business. And then I started my business when I was in college. Most people don't know this, but I started it because I wanted to apply to business school. And I was like, well, if I have a business, they have to let me into business school.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. But I ended up never actually applying because I just wanted to major in something else by the time the applications came around. But I kept the business around. So that's kind of how that got started. And I started as an intern for a wedding photographer. And so that's kind of how I started with wedding photography.
Yeah, and how many years has it been? You've been in business for like a really long time, right?
Yeah, October was my 7th year, which
Whoa.
feels crazy to say.
That's so crazy because I am not hitting 4 until January. And so backstory, like I met Jontell because of our mutual love of photography, but I met her in college during my 3rd year. And that was before I even like started my business. So like you've been around like throughout my entire journey, but that's so crazy to me because you started when you first started in college. And so it's like wild because we like Voxer memo back and forth every single day. So it's like hard to think of a time where like I didn't talk to you every single day about photography stuff, but it was definitely was a time. But how did you decide to kind of make the pivot into branding photography? I know you mentioned that like kind of right at the beginning when you were introducing yourself, that's what you're focusing on now.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of things in my business just kind of happened. Like they were things that I loved. And it's like, wait, maybe I should turn this into something. So back in 2017, when I was still just fully focused on weddings, I had a friend who did calligraphy for weddings and she asked me to just take some headshots for her. And they turned into kind of like styled headshots with some of her work. And I just had a lot of fun with it. So just moving forward, I was like, wait, maybe I will like try to turn this into something. And it just kind of happened like with some other creatives, wedding creatives asking me to take headshots for them. And then they would become more. So I'm calling them styled headshots because at the time I did not realize brand photography was
branding was a thing. Yeah.
So then finally in 2019, I said, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. And I'll say that I kind of was still really focused on weddings at the time. And then pandemic rolled around. And so I was kind of figuring out ways to pivot in my business, and brand photography was right there and I was having a lot of fun with it. So I just decided to kind of focus on that. And now I don't want to stop.
Yeah, I know. It's been cool to see like the evolution of when you like kind of were just dabbling in it. And then when you were like, I'm actually really going to like focus on this and try to make this my main thing. And it's been super like inspirational to me just watching you go through the whole process. Because for a really long time, I like saw you doing brand photography and I was like I don't know if I want to do that. Like that's Jontell's thing. And then after a really long time, I like decided to start focusing in on it as well. And it's been really cool because you're like, yes, like please talk about all the like branding photography related things with me as well. So I wanted to ask you, what is one thing that you think every single creative should know about branding in general or brand photography specifically?
That's a good question. I feel like when people like ask me things about branding, I always try to take it back to the photography side of things because branding is so big. I'm like, there's a lot about branding that I probably can't give you great advice on, but probably the photo side. I think some people don't realize the importance of really having a strategy with their brand photography. Like yeah, having great headshots is wonderful, but really having shots that can show people like what you're doing in your business is just really
Mhm.
important for your website, social media. I actually have a realtor that, this is kind of random, but I saw her photo on Facebook this morning, and we did a really fun shot during her session where she's like walking into the house as if she was about to do a showing, and she used that as one of her like announcement photos today, which isn't how
Mhm.
I thought she would use it, but I was like, wait, that's so
Mhm.
much more fun than you just posting a simple headshot of yourself. So I think that if people realize that you can do a lot with brand photography and you can really make it fun and make it personal to your brand, something really important to remember.
Yeah, and I've found this to be true, and I think it's really funny because, like, as a photographer, I'd had headshots, like, swapped with other photographers kind of here and there for a ton of different years, but, like, as soon as I did, like, a full branding session, I was like, "Wow, it is so much easier to pull, like, images that kind of match, like, the marketing and, like, the messaging that I'm trying to convey," and it's like, that is so much more powerful than just, like, a random headshot of me from like 2 years ago, like sitting somewhere and just smiling at the camera. Like it's just way more intentional and purposeful. So I really love that. And I like it that like brand photography is becoming more of like a solidified thing within the industry because you started before it was even called branding photography. But I wanted to take things like a little bit more behind the scenes of JVP. What is one thing that you're working on behind the scenes that people might not know about from social media behind your business?
I feel like, so you know this, but I am
Mhm.
not big on social media, so there's probably a
Yeah.
lot that people don't know.
Yeah.
But something that I'm really excited about is I am starting to move into product photography a little bit,
Mhm.
which kind of feels like just kind of the next step from brand photography, because some of my clients do need product photos. So I've kind of been
Mhm.
working on them, but I'm really excited to kind of build that side of the business and also just learn so much about how product photography works. There's a lot.
Mhm.
There's a lot in like
Mhm.
Photoshop and stuff that I'm just really excited to learn about. But that's probably the biggest thing that I'm most excited about that most people don't know.
Yeah, I love that. This is like not a planned question, but I'm just gonna run with it. What is it like learning like a new style of photography as an established photographer? Like, is there something that you rely on when you are like pivoting into a new type of photography? So like brand photography or like product specifically? Like, what is your best way of like learning and getting good really quickly?
That's a great question because I think I haven't thought about it, but
Hmm.
now that I am thinking about it, I think even going back to when I was learning weddings, I always would just
Hmm.
like study photos. And I think I've told you like there's a few product photographers where I'm like their work is so
Hmm.
amazing. I'm just gonna like look at it, kind of look at the backdrops they use and the different lighting. So I think just like studying the work of people that I admire was helpful with weddings, branding, and it's helpful now with products. And so in a way, that along with education, like whether it's investing time or money into it, is probably what I found to be the most helpful and to get good quickly, just because I think practice is great, but if you can
Hmm.
practice with actual tools from that you've gotten from educators or just other
Hmm.
people who are a few years ahead of you, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I can actually echo that sentiment, I guess, just because when I started photography, I started in high school and I took pictures for years and years without and like would look up to other photographers, but was missing kind of like the educational component of like I could see what people were doing and I was trying to emulate that, but I didn't understand how they were getting the photos that they were getting. Like I didn't realize that like a really big gap was like my lighting was okay, but my editing was like a little off. And there was like, it was just so wild to see like the transformation that happened when I actually took like a course. And it was like a combination of like one practicing a lot, but also like really studying photos and like diving deep into the education to figure out like how to make that transformation. So that's pretty interesting. I love that you mentioned that. And I wanted to ask you, what does your day to day or week to week kind of look like behind the scenes?
Yeah, that's a fun question. Because a lot of people don't know that I actually work a full-time job now outside of photography, which is a
Hmm.
more recent thing. So in the past, my day-to-day was a lot more flexible, which is, I think, one of the most fun parts about being self-employed.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
But now I have very focused work time. It tends to be in the evenings, or I have Fridays off from my full-time job. So I'll do a lot of work on Fridays and weekends, which is okay with me because I've just decided that this is the season that I'm in. So that works.
Hmm.
But I think that the biggest thing for me is having specific days to do certain work. So I don't necessarily do marketing on Tuesdays or anything like that. But at the beginning of the week, I'll kind of figure out what needs to be done and plan
Hmm.
accordingly, just because I have a short amount of time to be doing work. So I want to make sure it's very focused on, the most important tasks.
I can remember when I first started my business, I would box or Jontell like every single Monday because I was so overwhelmed with everything that I had to do. And it took me a really long time. I'm like the opposite in which I do actually slot specific tasks for specific days because my brain is just like goes down a rabbit hole and I would get super overwhelmed on Mondays. And that's kind of what that was like brought out of. But I really wished when I had first started my business, I had set those like these are the specific days or like specific hours I'm going to work on my business outside of my full-time job because it very quickly like took over all of my free time. And I wish I had been a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more organized when I had first started because that would have been really, really helpful. But I love that you shared just like a little bit about like what your week we used to be like versus like is now with balancing both of them. And I think you do a really good job of balancing both. And it's like it's really interesting like seeing you make that transition too. But yeah, and I wanted to go back to the whole idea of I know you don't use social media as one of your main like areas of time and energy. So do you have advice for photographers that are maybe looking to grow their business but are not exactly looking to do that through social media?
I love this question.
I know you do.
You know that for many years, social media was just something that I just hated, and it was always just a stress point for me, a pain point.
Mhm.
I would say that my advice would be don't be afraid to explore other avenues, but also if you're going to do that, it's really important to make sure you have stats or analytics that can kind of back that up. So for me, SEO is a big part of how I reach my branding clients. And it
Mhm.
wasn't intentional at first. I just happened to blog branding sessions because I was trying to just show people that I did branding. And
Mhm.
it just kind of worked out that the SEO became really strong over time. And once I started noticing that, I then was strategic about it and made
Mhm.
sure I was looking at the different stats and looking at what blog posts people were clicking on and from where. And sorry, I'm getting like into the little things, but
Details. That's fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that, maybe word of mouth can be really strong for someone if they know how to do it well, if they're in different spaces. I have a friend who's also a brand photographer, and she does work at a co-working space. I think I told you about her. And so a lot of her business comes from word of mouth from all the different people that work in her co-working spot. So that's probably not something that she thought would be a big source for her in the beginning. And then you
Mhm.
kind of just, you explore it and see how it goes. And go with it. So yeah, I think my biggest advice would be if you are going to try something outside of social media, like don't be afraid. I know that for the longest time, I just thought that if I wasn't posting on Instagram, my business would fail. It hasn't, and I haven't posted since July, and it's December.
Oh,
So
has it really been that long? I didn't even realize because like
yeah,
you
I
still
mean, I
pop
post
on
stories for my
stories.
blog posts,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
that's it. I have not
Yeah,
posted feed.
I did not realize that because I see your stories pop up and like it's either like life things or like a recent shoot and stuff like that. So I didn't even realize that you hadn't posted to your feed in that long. So like you can definitely have your business survive without posting to social. And I think I mean when I was first starting out, I felt the exact same way. It was like if I don't post to social media, like I'm not going to gain any business. And it's so funny because like over the years, one of my like top two referral sources has it's never been social media. It's been personal referrals and client referrals. So like word of mouth essentially, even though
Yeah.
I've like poured so much time and energy into like social media. It is like probably the top one of the like top 5 things, but over time consistently it's actually been word of mouth. And so I love that you're saying like it's okay to like, branch out, try something different and like not be so scared to like not use that as like your primary avenue because I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes, whether that's like internal or like external on using social media for your business. And so, I mean, that's something that I still like struggle with. I recently like switched over to just like using a personal account versus a business one. And it's already made me feel like 5 times better. And so it's okay, like whichever way you want to run your business. I think there's so many different ways of being successful. So I love that. And so last question that kind of goes along with this that I wanted to ask you is, what advice would you give yourself when you were starting 7 years ago? I wrote 5 years ago and I realized that like you've actually been in business for 7. So 7 years ago. So like Jontell, when you were first starting out with photography as a business.
That's so crazy because like I was in college at that time, so I feel like I was so young and there was so much I didn't know. I would probably tell myself to not be afraid to do things. I think everything in my business that I was afraid to do, whether it was raising my wedding pricing or even like launching brand photography, I could have done it in 2018, but I was like, I don't know if people want this. But everything that I was afraid to do ended up working out really well. And I think that a lot of times my regret was not doing it sooner. So that would be my advice to myself. Don't be afraid, just do it. And don't be afraid to pivot either. I think that's probably another thing, which I think is really exciting as a small business owner, is just knowing that you can make your business your own. And I think that when I was a baby business owner, when I was 7 years ago, I was looking at everyone on Instagram and trying to like be like them and make my business like theirs. And I think that now it's so nice to know that my business is my own and I can work a full-time job and not feel like I need to be a full-time business owner unless I want to be. And so yeah, my advice would be just don't be afraid and don't be afraid to pivot, make your business your own.
I love that. All right. Last thing is, where can people find you online and just keep up with the things that you're doing in your business and life?
Yeah. So I have an Instagram and I do post to my stories, but pretty much only stories. So I'm at Jontell Vanessa, and then I blog almost weekly. So if you ever want to see all the fun brand shoots that I'm doing, jontellvanessa.com is where my blog is. And yeah, so you can keep up with me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'm so excited that I got to chat with you in like in this capacity, because usually we have like very rambly Voxer conversations back and forth, but I love this conversation. I think you had like a really, really like helpful and just like inspirational things to say for especially photographers who are starting out. So I just wanted to thank you for coming on. If you loved this episode, be sure to check out my free masterclass for photographers to help you book out your wedding photography business this upcoming year. I chat through 3 key tips that you can start implementing today to confidently raise your prices and book those dreamy clients. You can sign up at manaliphotography.com/class, CLASS. I'll see you inside.